Sabu is a man that has made a mark on pro wrestling, much like the marks and scars that make up his body. Sabu is a beloved figure to those who either love or appreciate hardcore wrestling. I can remember being very intrigued by the guy when I first saw him in WCW. From there, Sabu went on to have a pretty interesting career. Whether you are a fan of hardcore wrestling or not, in my opinion, you have to respect the contributions that guys like him have made to the business through the years, sacrificing their bodies to make crowds more entertained, no matter how small or vast the crowd would be. So sit back and relax and let me take you through the career of the one and only suicidal, homicidal, genocidal maniac, Sabu. Now, before we get started though, if you are new here, please make sure you are subscribed and hit that bell notification, please. We would very much appreciate it. Sabu was born Terry Allen Brunk on December 12th, 1964, and is a Lebanese-born American from Michigan. Not much has ever been made public about his upbringing. We do know that Sabu was trained by his uncle Ed Farhat, who was known in wrestling simply as the Sheik. And he ran a promotion named Big Time Wrestling where Sabu would make his debut. Sabu was first known as Sabu the Elephant Boy, and also Terry SR, which stood for Sheik's Revenge. And Sabu debuted in 1985 and spent 6 whole years working spot shows for various promotions. And then in 1991, Sabu started working for the USWA in Memphis. And during this run, he was billed as Samu, which would end up being used in the WWF shortly after in the Head Shrinkers tag team by a whole different guy. And it was also during this time that Sabu started frequenting the Orient and working for FMW. This is where Sabu honed in his aggressive hardcore style that would become his trademark. This is also at the time of his career of the famous Ring of Fire death match, which was so legit dangerous that dudes nearly died, and the match ended abruptly due to the extreme heat. Sabu kept doing spots and working for the USWA all the way until 1993, when he received a series of dark match opportunities from the WWF, wrestling Scott Taylor twice, and even working with Owen Hart once as well. This gave WWF a look at Sabu, and ultimately he wasn't used any further. Sabu proceeded to debut for Extreme Championship Wrestling in October of 1993, and he was brought in at the request of Paul Heyman. And Heyman took Sabu and booked him like a madman with a Hannibal Lecter style gimmick, where he was brought out strapped to a gurney and the whole bit. At this time, Sabu was managed by Big Man 911. Sabu was without a doubt a big star for ECW during this time. Sabu won all 3 of ECW's championship during his initial run with the company, which came to an end in April of 1995 after Paul Heyman publicly fired Sabu in what was seen as a shoot. The story goes that Sabu no-showed this major ECW booking so he could take a bigger payday in Japan. This is one that many, even myself, still think was ultimately a work to this day. Sabu started working in Japan during this year of 1995 as well, and this time he'd be working for New Japan Pro Wrestling, and this would last all the way through the whole year until December of 95. Also in September of 1995, Sabu would appear on one of the Frontier episodes of WCW Monday Nitro, and even wrestled a WCW pay-per-view match against Jerry Lynn, who was known at the time as Mr. JL. And Sabu also would return to ECW in November of 1995. When you look at Sabu's 1995 in general, it's pretty amazing, if nothing else for the fact that he worked for New Japan Pro Wrestling, ECW, and WCW all in one calendar year. Sabu's second run in ECW is one that's most remembered and definitely seen by a wider audience. In 1996, Sabu also went back to Japan, this time to work for the Big Japan promotion. And while he was doing this, the build was starting between Sabu and Taz. The two supposedly had legit beef after Sabu left ECW the first time, and anticipation was ripe for these two to square off. Paul Heyman brilliantly held off and built this match up to be the feature match at ECW's very first pay-per-view event in April of 1997, called ECW Barely Legal. Of course, in the build-up to said pay-per-view event, ECW and the WWF ran an invasion angle of ECW talent that would end up taking over Monday Night Raw. This was my first ever glimpse at the stars of ECW, as I lived in an area of the country that did not get ECW programming. And up until this point, all I knew about the Philadelphia promotion was what little was printed in magazines such as Pro Wrestling Illustrated. And while this angle was memorable, it definitely didn't move the meter much as far as ECW goes. Sabu, though, was a huge part of this angle, doing a huge dive spot off the Raw set. Sabu would continue this memorable run as an ECW staple, winning all 3 ECW championships again during this time, and even holding Taz's FTW championship. In early 2000, Sabu and ECW parted ways for the final time. From there, Sabu's next move was to captain the indie circuit, which had grown significantly during the hot run of wrestling back in the late 90s and early 2000s. The stops were many here, including but not limited to XPW, IWA Mid-South, Stampede Wrestling, Border City Wrestling, and would even travel back to Japan to work for All Japan Pro Wrestling. Sabu was also a cornerstone of the short-lived World Wrestling All-Stars promotion, which in some ways was a precursor to NWA TNA, where Sabu would also do several appearances throughout the years as well. In fact, Sabu made quite a few appearances for TNA all the way up until 2006, and was a huge part of the mishmash cards that would usually involve a hardcore wrestling match somewhere in there. Sabu, of course, known for a high-flying hardcore style, and this was a guy who never seemed to let off the gas pedal, whether it was appearances for TNA or indies or what have you. You could count on Sabu doing some crazy stuff, including most likely going through a table. And Sabu was let go from TNA in early 2006, as mentioned, and from there Sabu signed a contract to be a part of WWE's rebranded version of ECW. Sabu would face Rey Mysterio at the One Night Stand 2 pay-per-view. Sabu spent the rest of 2006 and then into 2007 under contract to WWE, and was used a decent amount on the ECW television show on Sci-Fi, and also had several pay-per-view matches. Sabu has even performed at the granddaddy of them all, and was a part of an 8-man tag match at WrestleMania 23 in 2007. After the WWE release, Sabu went back to what he does best, travel the world. Soon he'd pop up in Mexico for AAA. Then he'd have a memorable stint with Juggalo Championship Wrestling with the Insane Clown Posse. Sabu would also return to TNA in 2010 to participate in an ECW reunion of sorts called Hardcore Justice. And a few months later, he would part ways with that company once again. From there, for the past decade almost, even into this present day in 2021, Sabu has yet to officially retire from pro wrestling, Perhaps something else is yet to come for Sabu, with the wrestling landscape more prime than it has been in years. And in 2019, Sabu returned to TNA under the Impact Wrestling banner for a one-off appearance, which as far as I can tell is the last major TV appearance for the hardcore legend. So what's next for Sabu? Only Sabu probably knows. Maybe a program or two in AEW, maybe a Hall of Fame induction, who knows? While the latter may not be likely, you do never know, you just never know in this wrestling business. What would you like to see him do next, if anything? Maybe retire? I don't know. Let me know down in the comments section. Before I wrap up here, I want to hear from you guys. Let me know about your favorite Sabu matches, stories, spots, etc. Love hearing about all that stuff from you guys. Please do the brand a favor, drop a like on this vid and subscribe to the channel if you just found me here. I'd most certainly appreciate that. Want to thank you very much for watching. Until next time, we see you on the pro wrestling planet.